Mayor Frank Jackson is putting a stop to illegal dumping. The city of Cleveland will not tolerate illegal dumpers and businesses putting trash where it doesn't belong. The message to illegal dumpers: if you are caught, you will pay steep fines or possibly face jail time. Some have been fined up to $50,000 for violating city dumping laws. If you see someone illegally dumping, you may want to report it. Tipsters can receive a reward worth half of the fine if the city wins the conviction. Mayor Jackson wants violators to know the city plans to aggressively enforce these laws. To report illegal dumping or get more info, call 216-664-3867.
Hello and welcome to Public Safety in the City. I'm your host, Blaine A. Griffin, Executive Director of the Community Relations Board. Mayor Jackson recently introduced another tool for us to fight violent crime in the city. He introduced legislation and gun control laws that he feels is necessary for the city of Cleveland to have a safe community. Today, to discuss those gun laws with us and the proposed legislation, we have with us our Law Director, Barbara Langhenry, and our Chief Corporate Counsel for the City of Cleveland, Rick Horvath. Rick, Barbara, how are you all doing today?
Good morning.
All right. Tell us a little bit about these laws that this legislation that Mayor Jackson just proposed to City Council, and also we really want to get a sense of how is legislation created in the City of Cleveland and how the process goes. So, Barbara, I'll start with you.
Okay, this legislation was just introduced into the City Council at the July meeting. When legislation is introduced, that's the first step, and Council generally then will set it for committee hearings, and people from the community may be invited to testify, various members of the administration may be invited to testify, and various committees of the City Council will consider the legislation, and that's the point we're at now. This legislation took existing codified ordinances that we had in the City of Cleveland that dealt with gun laws, and it takes all of those out and replaces them with new laws. And by new, some of the laws that are going in mirror state law on gun regulation. And all of the laws that are in there are misdemeanors. The city cannot establish felonies. We can only establish misdemeanors. And so the state laws that we mirror are misdemeanors. And those include things like how you have to address a weapon when it's in your vehicle, if you're a concealed carry holder or otherwise. Using weapons while intoxicated. Those are things that are already in the state law, and we put those in to our law, and they can be enforced by our police as misdemeanors. Even in the state law, they can be enforced by our police. There's things that address securing your weapons in your home. Underage purchase of weapons that is still in it. Use of weapons in public places. And you can't deface the identification on a firearm. That's also in the state law. And there are some sections that address how weapons may be transferred that are currently in the state law. In addition to that, there were a few things that were already in our law that we kept there, like the voluntary surrender of a firearm to our police stations. In addition to that, there are some new initiatives that are in this law, and Rick was going to talk about some of those new initiatives.
And Rick, before you talk about those new initiatives, and I know you all, one of the things I learned about our law department is our law department is thorough and they stick to facts, and they will never give up our legal defenses. But I will just quote a couple of editorials that I've read lately. Plain Dealer called it provocative. Other people have called it unique. And this is the law department that sued Wall Street at one time. So we do have some new parts of this, but this is groundbreaking legislation that we feel is necessary, that Mayor Jackson feels necessary, and has introduced it to council. But Rick, tell us about some of the new portions of it as well.
Some of the new provisions, Blaine, deal with, for example, limiting firearm purchases to one per person within a 90-day period. There's also a provision that deals with improperly providing firearms to a minor. That makes it an offense to leave a firearm in a manner that allows access to a firearm by a person under 18 years of age. There's a new provision. This one's actually a hybrid. It mirrors state law, but also expands it to deal with the city of Cleveland. It's improperly discharging a firearm on or near prohibited premises. It's already prohibited in state law to carry a gun around a school, for example, or in parks. But what this would deal with is our rec centers and our playgrounds here within the city of Cleveland, and it better defines where you cannot discharge a firearm near city property. There's a new provision dealing with reporting the transfer of firearms. That prohibits the sale or transfer of a firearm without reporting the sale to the Division of Police unless you're purchasing it from a licensed gun dealer. Licensed gun dealers already have certain reporting requirements. So all this deals with is the sale or transfer of weapons where you're not dealing with a licensed gun dealer. There's also a provision that deals with the prohibition against transferring firearms to a felon or an intoxicated person. You might say, isn't that already prohibited under state law? Well, it is, but the standard there is a reckless standard. And we're making it a negligent standard to make it a misdemeanor within the city code to negligently sell or furnish a firearm. And these standards between reckless and negligence, these are criminal standards that are defined in our code and that our prosecutors and police really understand. We're talking about reporting lost or stolen firearms. That is an aid to the police department to know when a gun has been lost and it's in circulation. And finally, we're proposing to enact a gun offender registry. This is new for the city of Cleveland, but it's not new in the country.
So this is a best practice across the, in several cities that people have put in place.
A number of cities have this. New York City, Chicago, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Maryland, Utica, New York have gun offender registries. We're merely mirroring what they have, but we're bringing it to Cleveland because it's a useful law enforcement tool. And it would say that if you're convicted of a gun offense as it's defined in the code, you are required, and you live in the city of Cleveland, you're required to register with the safety department each year for a period of 4 years and provide them with the information that they seek and also be fingerprinted. And that will be, again, an annual registration that must be performed, and it's a misdemeanor not to actually do this. And the safety director will maintain a registry of persons in our city who have been convicted of a gun offense. And that information will be a useful tool to the safety forces, and actually under the code as proposed, the safety director will provide that information to other law enforcement agencies as well.
That's great. I'm excited about this legislation. I mean, these stories that you're talking about, I can attach a story to every piece of legislation that you have. And I'm pretty sure that your prosecutors can probably attach stories to each of these pieces of legislation that you just talked about, especially when you talk about playgrounds and our parks. I can tell you that there's several high-profile stories that we've seen where young children have been victims of violence because of some of those crimes that take place at parks or pools or recreation centers. So I'm specifically very passionate about those being safe places. So I'm glad that that legislation will address that. Let me be devil's advocate for a minute. The critics, and we know that, let's be honest, Congress at our federal level, along with the president, at the state level, any level of government that you can imagine, gun legislation is always a very, very touchy topic because of Second Amendment rights and other things of that nature. We just recently had a rally where people were saying, these gun legislation laws, we're going to take them to court and we're going to fight them. Mayor Jackson basically told us he doesn't care. He feels that he still feels it's necessary, and this is what we need to do to make our local communities safe. Tell us about, and I know that you guys really want to stay on the legal premises of this, but tell us about why you still feel confident in fighting for these laws and this law that we're being proposed.
Well, right now this is just a proposal and it's being considered by the City Council, and we don't know that this is what the final law will look at. As I said before, we're in the committee hearing process, and the Council will hold various hearings and hear things from citizens or anybody else who may want to testify before them. And the legislation could change at that point. We have been informed by some of the gun rights advocates that they will sue us over this law, and with whatever law that passes, we will defend the legislation that the city has passed. But at this point, these are still proposals that council is considering, and we don't know what the final law will look like.
But Barb, you said something that was interesting to me one time. I mean, we all, as colleagues, have these conversations every once in a while. And one of the things that you said is that, well, we've passed laws for litter, we've passed laws for other type of offenses. So, you know, give me the premise of what you were saying with that, because I thought that was very enlightening what you said about, you know, just because people may not like it doesn't mean it's not a reason for us to pass it.
That's correct. I think what you're referring to is the critics who are saying, well, aren't these laws ineffective because the criminals won't follow them?
Right.
And as a society, we try to organize our society and regulate behavior by passing laws. Laws against littering, laws against speeding, laws against assault. And those are things that are important to us, that people not litter or speed through our streets because of safety hazards or assault one another. And it would be kind of silly if we didn't pass laws just because we thought there were people who wouldn't obey them. Laws are effective at regulating behavior, and there's a consequence if you don't follow the law. And so it's not a reason not to regulate behavior because there will be people who do not follow it.
Right, right. And I tell people the irony in a lot of this, the irony with a lot of the gun rights activists, they often say that, you know, federal government is too large, and I'm not going to ask you to theorize on this, but federal government is too large, and mostly everything should be at local government, and that we should have a right to basically make laws that benefit our local government and smaller government. So here we are doing what we think is best for Cleveland, but we often get challenged on home rule and things like that. So how would home rule affect us in this?
Well, the general principle of home rule is in the Ohio Constitution, and it allows the city to make police regulations, and this is a police regulation, that does not allow what the state forbids or does not forbid what the state allows. And then we can make any kind of regulations. There's also another part of home rule called local self-government, where we can make laws on how we function as a government. But this is what's considered a police regulation because it's regulating behavior of our citizens. And that's important for local communities to be able to have their regulations because areas of the state differ. A crowded urban environment is different from the farmland that's in other parts of our state. And so there's a need for different kinds of regulation. And the state may not have, for certain types of things, the state may not have comprehensively regulated. And so we as a municipality have the ability to tailor laws to our specific environment, in which case we have an urban environment, which is very different from a state environment. And I don't know if you...
But the thing that washes over me, Blaine, as you're asking your question, is really what we're trying to focus in on is the wrongdoer, the person who is using guns for violence. We're not talking about going after law-abiding citizens. The gun offender registry, you only have to register if you've been convicted of a gun offense. So you've already crossed that line. So the law-abiding citizen out there, we're not trying to take away your guns. That is not what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with the gun violence that we experience every day in our community. And that's why we need to do something about it. That's why Mayor Jackson feels strongly that something needs to be done. And we hope that the community will get behind an effort to deal with the gun violence.
And Rick, you bring up interesting. I know that all of these battles are always fought, through the legislative process, through the judicial process. I know that there's a lot of processes in place in order to have this discussion. But the community, from what I can tell, being out in the community and doing some of the reading of the editorials, seem like they're very much behind you. Recently, the Plain Dealer just wrote an editorial, and they basically said that this is great. We're glad that everybody says that, Mayor Jackson is doing something about this issue. It's very interesting to me that we have people that say we want something done about this gun violence and we want this gun violence to stop. And here's a very formidable tool that's been introduced, and of course council is going to discuss it. But then you have other folks that say, wait a minute, that's, you're doing something, but now you're affecting our rights. But that being said, I just want to understand how the law department and tell me if I'm wrong. You have your personal views, but looking at this from a legal standpoint, looking at this from, best practice, and looking at this from comparing it to other cities, do we feel we have a confident process, or do we feel we have a confident law that will stand the test after all of these processes really discuss it in the public debates? Do we feel that we have a good shot, that we're going to make these laws stand?
As you said earlier, gun laws are always very controversial, and there are certainly some things in here that are controversial, and we've been told that by gun advocate people. And through the process, when the council does finally legislate, they will have considered something that they believe is necessary for our community.
And Rick, you've been around City Hall for quite some time, and you've seen a lot of interesting battles. And of course, this one is going to be very interesting as well. Tell us, in your experience, have we ever tried this before? And what can the community anticipate? I mean, I'm really trying to get to what can the community anticipate. This is not something that's going to go away without a fight. So from your experience, tell us how this works.
Well, I've been around long enough to know that I think it's important that people get engaged in the process. And that's what City Council will be undertaking now. It's my understanding that the leaders of the council have proposed a number of hearings to be heard, both for opponents as well as proponents. And along the way, legislation gets changed. There may be something in here that upon reflection the legislators think should be changed before it becomes the law of the city. That happens with any ordinance that we put in. And so it's a give and take process. And through this process there'll be changes, and I'm confident that as it works its way through the legislative process, what passes and comes out of council will be a better ordinance than even we drafted coming in. We can't anticipate every situation, and the more there's a give and take in the community and people express themselves and we hear from proponents and opponents, the piece will be polished, and I'm confident that once it passes, we'll have an ordinance that we can be proud of here in the city of Cleveland.
And I know that, once again, I respect my law department. They keep us all in line as all directors. So there's times when we're passionate about things, and the law department really helps temper us. But I don't think you guys get enough credit. I mean, I heard everybody in the community very excited when you put the lawsuit about Wall Street. And I know that former Director Triazzi was here, but I know that both of you were very involved in looking at those kind of things. Our law department has been bold in looking at legislation and looking at laws in order to try to do what's right and what's best for the city of Cleveland. So I want to commend you guys for that. But just tell us about, as you get into these legal disputes and legal battles, it's good for the community to be behind you. Is that true, like Rick said, and really be engaged? That's a good thing for the community to be behind you. Am I right, Director Langhenry?
Yes. I mean, the city represents the community, and that's why we take up the fights that we take, because there's a belief by the policymakers in our community that these are important things to us.
That's great. Now, if somebody really wants to understand, because I have to rely on you and I have to rely on Rick in order to help give me a legal opinion. If somebody really just wants to understand these laws more in detail, I know that they can follow the council hearings that's going to take place, but is there anywhere that anybody can go? I'm going to ask our host, our gracious host from Channel 20, to post some of the recommendations that we've made, the 7 or so recommendations that we've made. But is there anywhere that somebody can actually study this so that broader community support short, and so that when we go out to the community, we can put it in layman's terms so that most people in the community can look at it and say, I understand that this is the right thing that we'd like to have for our city. Is there anywhere that they can do that, your website or other press releases or anything?
We don't have anything on our website. The mayor's office, when it issued a press release about the ordinance being introduced, did provide a summary along with their press release, and I believe that's on the mayor's website. In addition to that, the full law as introduced is published in the city record, and the city record is essentially the minutes of the council hearings, and that's available online on the city council's website. This would be, the law as introduced would have been published in the city record that either came out on the 16th of July, the day that it was introduced, or a week later. I'm not sure how they do it in the summer when it was introduced on the day that the city record is usually published. But there are also a lot of resources on the internet where you can just learn about what's going on in other cities. There are various gun control advocate organizations that have a lot of information about gun violence that are available on the website.
Sure. Just picking up on what Barbara said, I think if a citizen is interested, a good resource is just your neighborhood public library. If you go to the public library and ask them to assist you in locating a copy of this ordinance or frankly any other law, they should be able to help you get on the internet and locate a copy of the council's minutes. As Barbara indicated, it would be for the meeting that occurred on July 16th that this particular ordinance was introduced. But through the resources of the library system, I'm confident that anyone who is seeking a copy of the ordinance can get it.
And I do want to go on record, Barb, you and Rick joined Mayor, Chief Williams, myself, Safety Director McGrath, in going out and talking to approximately 60 or so pastors that really had an interest in all that was being presented. So I'd like to thank you for that. A lot of them were very impressed by the presentation that you made, and that's why I said, you know, more people need to understand what our law department is doing. In closing, is there anything that you would like the community to take away about this work that you're doing? Any thoughts? I mean, it's hard work, and this is not an easy debate. I don't want anybody thinking that this is an easy conversation, and that's the reason why I wanted Rick and Barbara to be here today. But what thoughts would you leave us with today as you pursue, you know, the process of this legislation?
These kinds of issues are very important to the community, and this is precisely how these kinds of issues get discussed and talked about, is when City Council takes it up and determines how as a community are we going to approach these issues, how are we going to regulate them. And this is what City Council does, and this kicks off the dialogue. The City Council allows, well, the mayor has the right to introduce legislation under the City Council's rules, but it allows administrators to also put things in. So some of the ideas come from the administration, but this is the process, and as Rick said, getting engaged is an important part of it, and when it's important to people, they can come down and testify. They can contact their council member and tell their council member how they feel about this legislation as it's progressing. Some people find it difficult to be able to come down, or they're shy or whatever, but they can also call council members or leave a note for their council member on their thoughts on this. I mean, I'm a citizen of the city of Cleveland too, and safety, I have young, not so young children, but children, and safety is always a concern for me, and I love living in the city, and I want our residents to feel safe and secure in the city, and this is something that the administration and council are taking up as another tool to try to make our community safer.
That's great. Rick?
Well, I think I just have to mirror Barbara. The takeaway here is to get involved, to listen. TV 20 covers these council hearings from beginning to end. You'll be able to see both the proponent's testimony and the opponent's testimony, and stay engaged. Share that information with your councilman, share that information with the council leadership, share it with the mayor's office. Stay involved and give your opinion. Are you in support of doing something about gun violence in the city? Here is an opportunity for a dialogue between your government and you, and I think it's very important that people stay involved in the process, follow the process, and make their opinions heard.
Thank you. Barbara, Rick, I'd like to thank you for all that you guys are doing with the law department. I know that you have a tough job, and I commend you. I see the hard work that both of you guys put in, and I wanted the community to see you and all of the work that you guys put in. So I'd like to commend you and keep up the good work. That's all I can really tell you.
Blaine.
Thank you, Blaine.
Once again, thank you for joining us for this series of public safety in the city. You're going to hear about enforcement. You're going to hear about policy, as Barb and Rick just talked about. You're going to hear about all the sectors and the street outreach and all of the things that we do for public safety in the city. Once again, it needs a comprehensive approach to public safety in the city. But most importantly, Rick, Barbara, Mayor Jackson, several other people have said the same thing. We need you. We need the community to be engaged if we're going to have a safer city and a better quality of life in our city. Thank you for joining us for Public Safety in the City. Once again, I'm your host, Blaine A. Griffin.